It's great to be welcoming the Circuit Poets here today. As you may or may not know, the Circuit Poets is a thing that's been going since 1970, and every year it brings 4 or 5 student poets to college campuses across the state. Alumni include poets like Chase Twitchell, who was at Trinity in 1973, or graduated in 1973, and is now a major national figure. Michael Collier, who went to Connecticut College, and Aracelice Gourmet, who also went to Connecticut College. I found out today as well, just sort of looking over the list, that Naomi Wolf was also a circuit poet in 1982. That Naomi Wolf. So it's an important program, and a program that often leads to great things. Today we have poets from Quinnipiac University, Yale University, Wesleyan University, and Middlesex Community College, as well as our own Sarah Beckman, who is at Trinity, who's a member of the rowing team, a wonderful young poet, wonderful person. She's working on a thesis right now with Professor Rossini, and she's of course going to be graduating later in the spring. The poets are going to read in alphabetical order, but with Sarah, since she's the home poet, reading at the end. And I guess you guys will introduce each other, is that right? Yeah, okay, so I will leave you to it. Please give a warm welcome to our Circuit Poets 2018.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce our first poet. Our first poet is Nyung An. Nyung An is a junior at Quinnipiac University, where she majors in English and journalism. Nyung's poetry has been published in Montage, the Quinnipiac Arts and Literary Journal, and in Brooklyn Poets' The Bridge. She is the recipient of the Donald Hall Poetry Prize. She plans to be a broadcast journalist after school. Nyung would love to travel and deliver international news, but she also wants to go to graduate school in the States for possibly a doctorate degree in either English or higher education. She would love to stay in the country, but also wants to publish something in the future that can make an impact to her conservative home of Vietnam. She wants to bring freedom of speech to her home city of Hanoi. Please join me in welcoming Nyung An.
I'm so short. Thank you for having me here. It's been an honor to do this in several colleges, and so I'm just gonna jump into this. My first 2 poems are inspired by my mother. She is very influential in my life, and I'm from Vietnam, but my mom's side of the family is Chinese, and she doesn't really talk about it, and I don't really know why. So this first poem is called My Mother Doesn't Teach Me Mandarin. My mother doesn't teach me Mandarin or Cantonese, her mother tongue, the language she heard from her parents' cries, the language of bullets tearing rough skin and infectious bare feet on wet mud, with words that exploded at her ears, reflected from her mother's broken glasses and her father's quiet veins. But she wants to learn your English, the language of money and soft, comfortable beds. She knows the hello and the goodbye, and the digits followed by the Vietnam dong and the progressive euros and dollars that will get her to bring me to the homes of those who enunciate your English at her ears with an unnaturally slow, loud voice and wild hand gestures, as she admires the complexion of your skin and your eyes, the color she wants to see in her grandchildren one day. Perhaps it's only fair that she doesn't let me hear her voice, for she can understand mine, my Vietnamese and my English, from the phrase I like girls that I dare not whisper even in the dark, to the phrase I love you, I share on my girlfriend's lips only when my mother is surrounded by the darkness of her eyelids and the sound of heavy rain in the ocean that distances between her whisper and my voice. This next poem is still about my mom. Her first name is translated into Snow White, and which is very interesting. And her dream has always been to bring me to America, and my dream was to also come to America to see the yellow school bus and snow. So this poem I wrote in her voice, as in how I imagine her, the way she's thinking, or how she thinks of me and why she wants to bring me here. So this poem is called Snow in America. I was born among the American bombs and rusty AK-47s. You were born in poverty, but no guns. I lie awake on the blood of communists and the death of my father. You sleep on my hard wooden bed with our dreams of America. In America, you will see my first name Snow in white instead of red, like your grandfather spit, or the flag of Vietnam, of China, of the communist color, of our famous Red River that drank our blood. In America, you will have to sleep without me. You will have to run with your own feet. But at least, you will sleep in a softer, warmer bed that your school or your American friends will give you out of pity or out of love. At least, you will run with the shoes I bought you, with the money I saved for years, and you won't have to see the color red at the bottom of your feet. At least in America, you can see the white of snow, the type that isn't salty or bitter like where my name had been. The kind that is fresh from the sky, innocent, untouched, unharmed. My little one, remember that snow in America can be very cold and harsh, but my little one, never forget that where you come from, the snow is red with the blood pumped by your heart and the warmth of a mother's soul. My little one, 3 months a year, I will see you, and I hope I'll be warmer, gentler than your snow in America. So this next poem is like a continuation of that last one that I just read. It's more about snow. This is I wrote when I was a freshman in college, and I was just looking back at the first time that I set foot in Boston. I went to high school in Boston when I was 16. So this poem is called Before Frost. Hanoi, Vietnam. Snow never falls upon my home to accompany the cold that lingers by the old streets and slowly stings our toes. Mom, why does your name mean snow and my middle name mean so, when we only know how snow feels inside the freezer and on my favorite TV shows? Boston, Massachusetts. I set foot there for the first time when I turned 16. The second week of December, I stared up at the sky, feeling the snow, tasting the cold. The cotton balls were falling, lighter than raindrops, heavier than air. The streets became like Dalmatians, but with white spots on brown land, and then white spots on our hair. The cold had not slithered in when snow fell, so we ran outside, burying our feet in the snow. It seemed as if my hands forgot to repel when the cold flew by and sting upon my nerves, as though cold was an old grumpy friend. Newton, Massachusetts. Classrooms were full of distracted kids, coming from different countries, staring at the windows, watching bits of white fluff falling gently, elegantly, like angels' tears that form into flakes of gentle and soft fleas, that then make up pillows and teddy bears, becoming children's dreams and my mother's first name. This next poem is inspired by when I used to write poetry to and about a girl that I was in love with in high school, but I used to write the poems and then change the pronouns from she, her to he, him, and because I was still in the closet. And in college, I found my voice and I was more comfortable with who I am, so I wrote this poem as a response to all the poems that I used to write using he, him. So this poem is called Breathe. I used to lie awake in my poetry next to him, wondering where the air had gone as my lungs thirsted for his silent breath, sunken in the crease of my black ink on the white paper, trapped in his own rigid four corners and my fear of being found, until he sat up and screamed at my ears and my handwriting, until he kissed me on the lips outside of my weak poetry, asking me to change his pronouns into hers while I ran away from my home and the wooden cage they called the closet, asking me to help her climb out of my ink written about a boy I loved who was only a boy inside my weak poetry, until I helped her climb out of my silenced voice, until I saw the way she ran, the way she took in my air, outside of my weak poetry, as she smiled and whispered to me that this was how I breathed. Sorry. His last poem, I'm going to end with this poem that I thought was too ambitious to read out loud. This poem is inspired by my favorite poet to date, Ocean Vuong. He wrote this poem called Notebook Fragments, and it was basically he took out some lines of his notebooks that he wrote every day, and it's more interesting than how I normally write poetry when I hide certain stuff. And so I thought it was interesting, and I also kept a notebook and I took out certain lines with a theme and then put together this poem, and it's called Note to Self. 100% Asian. How much percent gay? The French colonized Vietnam, so now we use the Latin alphabet and roam on ancient French-style streets. Thanks, but no thanks. I once burned all the flannels I owned because they might make people think I was gay. Is that homophobia or self-hatred? Look at my bag of tomatoes. Mom holds up her plastic grocery bag to the camera while yelling into the phone. 15 for less than $1. Can't do that in your America. Every word in the Vietnamese language has only one syllable. Ciao means hi in Vietnamese and sounds like the Portuguese ciao or the Italian ciao. Why didn't the French make us say bonjour? My favorite cousin visited Paris once. It smelled like piss and looked exactly like Hanoi. Underwhelming. I slept with that Yale girl again today and really felt the existence of hell. I'm not even religious. Is that homophobia or self-hatred? The Vietnamese eraser is gom because the French eraser is gomme. I have the most unique last name, An. It comes from the first king of Vietnam. Am I the original Vietnamese even with my mother's Chinese gene? I love you, she said exactly a week and 3 days before hopping onto some random guy's dick. Oh, I thought we weren't exclusive. Is that love? The first king of Vietnam got the country trapped in more than 1,000 years of slavery. My family still thinks I'm straight. Boogers in Vietnamese is good mũi, which is literally translated into nose is poop. English has no sense of humor. Sometimes I pity her for loving me and hate myself for loving her. Is that homophobia or self-hatred? I used to mix up the word tentacles and testicles when I was a freshman in college. That poor little octopus. Congratulations. Mom always sent me a sticker with this word on Facebook Messenger because she thinks it means I love you, dream about me in English. I have decided not to correct her. How did they manage to hide grandma when China and Vietnam were clashing? Underground, dear. My fingers still smell like her vagina. How much soap do I need to get it off? I have a date soon. I might apply for an asylum visa since Vietnam will condemn me to when I come out anyway. But do I really want to stay in the US? Congratulations, that same sticker again. I have slowly unlearned her smell, her voice, her car, and her birthday. Maybe. Speak up, Mom yells into the phone again. I miss living in that chaotic, deafening city. Silver Camry, November 26th. Fuck. Fun fact, there are 7.5 million people living in the city of Hanoi. When you're older, red envelopes no longer carry money, they carry condoms. The sound of helicopters' blades cutting the wind in movies still startles my mother. She often pretends like she didn't expect a bomb. Congratulations. I love you too, Mom. Of course I dream about you. Thank you. So this next poet is Griffin Brown. Griffin Brown is a senior at Yale, where he studies English and music. In addition to being a writer and poet, Griffin is also a composer, whose work spanning contemporary concert music, jazz, indie, and pop. He has been featured in venues across the country and in Europe. After college, he plans to attend graduate school in composition, as well as continue pursuing poetry. So let's give a round of applause to Griffin.
Thank you for the applause. I would just like to thank everyone for being here, and thank you so much to Trinity College for putting this together. It's an honor to be. I've never been here before. I've been to Harvard one time before, but so thank you all. I kind of wanted to start out of nowhere, in the same way that I was kind of started thinking about this first poem. I'd run into a sign on a wall at home. So this is the first poem. It's entitled "No Unique Delays." Or, in less bureaucratic language, washing oneself in the bathroom sinks at the public library was an issue introduced and tabled by the board one day and quickly erased from the minutes of that meeting. Thus, the placard. But yes, of course, you can reserve the hall, peruse the collections with your shoes off, wait outside for the slate Noguchi mobiles to arrive, if he makes them. Let's see. In the same bulletin, recently the renovations ended at the Trevi Fountain. People have been wading around in the marble basin like Mastroianni and Ekberg. Library cards require proof of address. Respite is a funny word that's often mispronounced. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in the fall, the Central Branch closes early to become a rooftop beer garden, DJ, PAs, microbrews, along with visions of downtown to the southeast and patrons exiting, heading north. And I have 4 other poems to read. These I think are somewhat more connected in ways that I didn't intend them to be, but now that I read them more, I think they are. And they all have to do with an I or people related to that I. And this first poem begins far away from here, but is still very much here. Concilio. Upon reaching the palace of the Venetian Doge, my father genuflected, the soft part of his hat clasped under his arm, leaving my mother alone to handle the pigeons and high-season crowds. To pass the time, she asked the Vaporetti drivers which part of the lagoon was deepest. She stayed for hours at the boat depot, the delta of 4 canals, culling opinion. When she felt she'd heard enough, she paid one to ferry her there, into the center of the estuary's northern half, out past Murano and Sant'Erasmo, past Luigi Nono's resting place, the Glass Museum, and the Lido sea wall, to the latitude where Madonna del Monte meets San Francesco del Deserto. Here she lingered, watching the islands sink lower, or, if you prefer, the water rise. You're going to hear more about an I and a you that, again, I originally wrote as separate characters, and they've kind of become the same characters. This first poem is entitled, third poem, entitled Shuffle. The street in the daytime, blustery and cold, short shadows going place to place. I'm in a clearing of my own quiet, music rushing up a white-branched cord from my phone to my ears. Nothing else vibrates, though cars drive by all the same. Wind chimes in a store niche strike together, or at least they must, but I can't hear them. I turn the corner to a north-south thoroughfare, images of traffic and the smell of soot. A woman appears down the avenue in velvet pants. They gleam faintly in the sunlight. She's walking away at a steady tempo, fading out. Gradually, the carillon begins to ring. Engines, conversations start. Near the green, some workers trade off shifts on a jackhammer. Others are eating their lunch on a bench by the center church, its steeple mixed among towers on the next few blocks and an obelisk atop a trap rock ridge far in the distance. Where do I go now? What is there to listen to? This next poem is entitled Aubade, which itself was kind of like an old French poetic genre that described two lovers in the morning having to leave one another because the night was over, and kind of originated as like a poem. I don't know if people can hear me. It kind of originated as like a poem of lamentation that the day had returned. So this poem is entitled Aubade. Did you cut your hair? There was some of yourself on the floor in the bathroom, but I did not address you. You weren't yet awake, dreaming maybe that I was someone else, dangerous, a criminal, a kidnapper. Your closed eyes dart about. A laconic morning, I stupidly brushed my teeth before coffee. You want to know where I ran to while you were asleep, whether the rain was too heavy to see through. It hasn't rained yet. It's waiting until I take out the trash. Later, back inside, evening, our life, dry clothes, dark windows, through which you catch sight of lightning bugs. At the start of the season, they hide somewhere, celebrating autumn discreetly, until one night they emerge, filling the backyard with neon bodies switching on and off. I asked you to trace their movements through the air, and instead you cleared the papers off our studio desk and drew directly on the blonde wood a series of points left unconnected, raising your hand to the after image still in our eyes of the firefly's last lighting. We hung it on a wall. The papers have been calling. They want to talk process. I only wish you would add another layer. Go over the pencil sketch with pen. I have one more poem to read. This one is entitled In Sight of the Ridge. October again. We resume our afternoon meetings at the park near the town line. You have retired your black cardigan for something warmer, earlier, I think, than in past years. The trail we walk circles the park's perimeter. It starts downhill and ends at the peak, which is also the start of a new round. 2 to 3 times. By the third, our breath is not just a weak figure in the air. Suddenly you are in a t-shirt. At lunch afterwards, I eat my first meal of the day on top of names cut into a piece of cedar someone at some time fashioned into a table. We begin comparing summer stories neither of us had heard before. You say, Berlin is a cloud. I could see myself there. My hands kept running across those names, carved on a whim, now hardened. Thank you very much. Our next poet, Our next poet is Jody Kahn. Jody Kahn is from South Florida. She will graduate from Wesleyan University in 2021, and her major is for now undecided. She has been recognized by the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. Her work has been published in Eunoia Review. I think I'm saying that right. I've said it twice now. I don't know if I'm saying it right. And Soothswarm Journal. Jody loves strangers and friends, movies, and books. She loves grammar and usage. She loves traveling but hates the going. She writes for the Wesleyan newspaper, The Argus. Perhaps most proudly, she is a lava cake enthusiast. Without much further ado, Jody Kahn.
Hi, everyone. Also, same sentiment. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. This first poem I'm going to read, I think being away at college, this is my first year at college, and being away from home, you start realizing all the ways that you're like turning into your mom, which has like been a very strange experience, and me trying to reject that at the same time as it's just like so inevitable that it happens. So this poem began as like a rejection of that and ended up turning into like an address to my mom. So it's called After. Mother, I am done with things that are bigger than me. The ocean, for instance, can be drained. I'll do it myself, sink my head in its salted reflection, swallow big, like how you taught me. Slurp the marbled eyes of small fish, neck tangled in an unreasonably fat piece of seaweed, perhaps suffocate in the plastic bag you threw in the water 6 years ago. I looked for it then, clawed through the water the way you went through your whole life. Couldn't find it, but I'm done looking, and Mother, I am done being told of things I cannot fix, of survive the narrative of fucked by, fucked over, tongues and skins sewn, meaning forget yourself. But I won't. Trace my body from rib to woman to pale and blooming orifice and accept it. What is happening happens again, they cannot stop it. There is a boy somewhere who will taste the salt on my tongue and know what I've always known. Mother, I am afraid all the time of the way the world looks at 5 in winter, royal blue, the color of your hands in the bathtub. Also of loving him too much, of the puddle of humiliation now dripping from my hair, over my arms, down my fingers. I feel safest when I am alone, and even then I am afraid. Waiting for your body to collapse on the dinner table, waiting for the light to fall, leaving our bodies in darkness. This next poem is also about my mother. I'm also always thinking about the things that we take from our moms, especially the things we take when they're not looking. This poem is called In the Image of My Mother. The last time I was in this sand, I was 6 years old. Thighs overtaken by a sea of beige and the same small glass pieces lying beside me. What I love about the beach is its movement, the way it is still, even in change. I am becoming my mother here, fighting against the white of the waves to remember how I once loved them, you, maybe even God. Fingers threading through the soft of the ground, grasping for anything. Something used to live here. Something with a body, a slimy bundle, teeth hidden in a bed of tongue. This is the world, an endless space bounded by horizon, no lights, no ceiling, no artificial walls of plaster. Finer and finer the meaningless distinctions. My feet, sanded, what is, was, will be. Where I come from, we call it Adonai. This next poem is untitled. It was inspired by a poem by Richard Sykin. Tell me about the time you ran through the night without clothes on so you could feel the warmth of the shower through your toes. How against the wind we are all sound, deaf from the buzz of collision, body and air. It's not like a cave, dark but terminal, light at its end. It's more like the echo of a hymn in daylight, how we rolled the bottom of our skirts to dance as if our feet were not already rooted in mud. The days rang a dark red, and when we laughed, there was always another stain to be washed out, always a pocket knife on his desk, a paperweight, or a weight like the one Liza carries with her as she runs until she's not her anymore. Look at the ocean growing darker. That means the sun is setting. That means we're untouchable. Tell me how all this will hurt us, our faces inseparable from shadow. Tell me we'll never let it. Lastly, I'm going to read this poem. It's concerned, I think, with the way that we interact with the environment and the way we often feel like we dominate our environment in the same way that in a relationship also that's the same dynamic. It's called Reclamation. There are tall blades of grass, thick and flat in the way of a cleaver knife, enough to make you ask why God made the food for deer in the image of a butcher's tool. Ask if the babies feel a cut through their sinew, then bone when they swallow. What would it be like to be carved from the inside out? He pushes me toward bushes littered with berries when I stare too long. A swarm of fat flies circles the fruit. Is something dead or just growing? Is there a difference? We pop round berries with our bodies, admire how they hold themselves together, then explode at once the way I never learned to love. There are smokestacks in the sky that follow a thud. I tell him there are men here who blow up mountains for chunks of coal. I don't say that in my reflection from the lake, I am cheap, porous, and charcoal in color, something burned that wishes to be buried. We drive back home, dried berries still crusted red on my thighs. Men in yellow hats shove dirt over canyons their own hands created. I tell him again, and after they blow up the mountains, they have to reclaim the land, piece it together until it is the same mountain it was before. He licks black juice from the pocket of my collarbone. In my head, I explain, it will never be the way it was. The sound his mouth makes is covered by the moan of a deer who found out what it's like to watch your child carved from the inside out. Do you smell that? The organs of mountains and animals thrown over our homes. How I dusted it off like guilt or dried mud. There's not enough room inside me for both my thoughts and bones. Thank you. The next poet who will be reading is Mari Spallone. Mari Spallone is in her first year of studies at Middlesex Community College, focusing on liberal arts. She is interested in family history, visual arts, and film. She is also a cello student. She has done some travel to Europe, Scandinavia, and South America. Her future plans include more writing, music, and art studies, and travel within the U.S. to some of the national parks. So, Mari Spallone.
Thanks, Jody. I'm excited to be here at Trinity tonight too, reading poetry. Thanks everybody for coming. You can hear me okay? Thank you. Put myself higher. I'm going to start with a short poem. This is called Yoga Class. Tiptoeing into the room, finding a spot not too close to or too far from the other yogis. I take a blanket and blocks, unroll my mat, and sit cross-legged, an awkward statue. I set a vague intention for my practice today, go from one pose to the next, move in and out of my comfort zone, a downward dog, a child, an airplane, a happy baby grabbing my toes, blissful. At the end, relaxation in corpse pose. Take what you need and leave the rest. Your body knows what you need even if you don't, the instructor tells us. Slipping into my flip-flops, I thank myself for showing up. I'm going to continue, I think, with a mother theme tonight. My mother was the youngest of 5 girls. Her sisters all studied classical music, and my mother was known as the one without any musical talent. This is called My Mother Taught Me Music. My mother taught me music, though no musician herself. She played Glenn Miller on the record player in the basement of her best friend's house in junior high school. She recalled disappointment one Christmas, her present not what she'd hoped for, but a violin case lined in green velvet. My mother was no musician, yet she brought me to symphony rehearsals to hear my aunts play. On a Saturday afternoon, we'd sit up close wherever we wanted, no one else in the audience. In the mornings, popular music and standards drifting from the radio, accompaniment to weekday kitchen breakfasts, her instant coffee. A whistler of a vast repertoire, she smokes a cigarette while someone else plays the piano. I am delivered to weekly lessons and expected to practice, practice, practice. It goes nowhere. Though she was no musician, my mother saw Sinatra how many times? 5? The last time was with me. She came to like Elvis, too, a country music phase, stuck to us both, soothing, sticky, sweet, and later, the opera and pop series. On frigid winter nights, I dropped her off to wait for me inside the theater doors while I parked. My mother taught me music in a style born of sorority dances. I hear her songs sometimes, in the scolding wind, in the sounds the robins make in April, and in the first proud blooms of the crocuses and daffodils as they push their way up from the warming soil. Their songs always in a major key. And while we're talking about crocuses and daffodils, these next 2 poems were inspired by my love of flowering plants, these houseplants. The first is a short poem. The second one is something I keep adding to and moving things around. This is Orchid. A surprise this morning, a shoot from my orchid. I've been looking for it, but plants are sneaky. I swear I looked just yesterday between the first and second leaves, but today here it is, inches long already. And some evening I will know when the Hoya blooms, its fragrant flowers announce themselves before you see them, the blossoms fierce in hiding. I hunt, but then forget until the sharp smell of perfume hits, and I say to no one, "What is that?" A new scent every time, although it's always the same. In 1939, Georgia O'Keeffe said, "Everyone has many associations with a flower, the idea of flowers. You put out your hand to touch the flower, lean forward to smell it, maybe touch it with your lips almost without thinking, or give it to someone to please them. Still, in a way, nobody sees a flower, really. It is so small, we haven't time." This is about flowering plants in 5 parts. 1. Latin names of my favorite flowering plants. Clivia miniata, Hoya. My orchid, a white Phalaenopsis. Interesting names of orchids I don't have. eyelash orchid. Ladies of the night, Latin name Brassavola nodosa. Moon orchid, pencil orchid. There are at least 10 different types of tongue orchids. 2. A study suggests that women, when in the fertile phase of their cycle, are more responsive to the eroticism in Georgia O'Keeffe's flower paintings. 3. Some flowering plants need to be subjected to stress in order to bloom, cold temperatures, deprived of water for extended periods of time. 4. In art class, I work on my personal tree. I am a Hoya, and I cut leaves from paper and trace them onto my body. My body is covered in hard, waxy pointed leaves. 5. I dream the plants were kidnapped, that they are missing from my house, where they are not forced to flower. Later, I find they only remained in your dark, empty rooms, unwatered, forgotten. And I'm going to end my portion of the reading tonight with a poem that was inspired by a trip to Los Angeles. Jody and I were talking a little bit about LA and the LA lifestyle. It's not like any city I've been to before. People seem to either love it or hate it. I love it. It's also not without its share of problems. This is Eulogy. A few years back, I didn't know you, but in the harsh sun, you caught the corner of my eye, moving along quickly, a determination in your bouncy walk, trying to blend in with the crowd. Midday Los Angeles sun baking the sidewalk, the din of a busy workday, and on the crowded street, keeping perfect pace with the others, yet something about your practiced stride, your focus, set you apart. Then I noticed your long, matted brown hair, your dark, heavy coat, no place to safely store it, no place to be invisible except in the middle of all these people on that busy street in broad daylight. An earnestness in the way you kept up with the crowd, hiding in plain sight. Others moved with equal intensity on their way to lunch or shopping. Designer handbags and shoes, a new outfit laid out at home, along with crisp sheets, Wi-Fi, a hot shower, and Thai food delivered to be eaten in front of Netflix, maybe out for a drink later and karaoke. Further downtown, long shadows and the endless sounds of the freeway, furtive glances, glass breaking, singing and voices shouting, shopping carts loaded with tattered discards, bodies settling in for the night in spaces staked out on sidewalks, their eyes watchful. That was my last poem. So everybody, maybe not everybody, but most people know who Sarah is. Sarah Beckman is a senior at Trinity, here at Trinity, where she majors in English with a concentration in creative writing. Sarah was the first prize winner of the Alumni Prize in English Composition, Spring 2016 Trinity College English Department Prizes. She's a member of Trinity College's women's rowing team, and a writing associate at Trinity College Writing Center. Sarah studied abroad at King's College, London, during the fall of 2016, and currently is applying to graduate schools for an MFA in poetry. If you want to update any of that, go for it. Okay, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to my fellow poets. It's been really fun going to all these different colleges and having the chance to read our poetry together. I write a lot about my childhood, and especially about the memories that I've created at my grandparents' house in Long Island. So this first poem is set at my grandparents' house, and it's called The Meaning of Things. Feet bare, head back in this white rocking chair, one hand holding my black journal, I write, as I sit on the porch overlooking the bay, an original poem, The Meaning of Things. Through the late summer sunlight, the leaves of a birch tree sway in the tender air, spreading an itchy scent, the brown, flaky seeds falling to the parched lawn. The wind carries some seeds across the road and into the swampy inlet, where a snapping turtle, open-jawed in the silt, awaits them. I close the journal, bending closer to the light that fills my nostrils and pores honey warm. The squirrel scales the telephone pole. A swan swims serenely, forlornly, atop those murky waters. An osprey streaks for his nest, bearing minnows in his talons for hungry mouths. The seconds pulse. I think of those I love, they all sleep here tonight, and of all the things I left behind to come to this place. Those things are in another world. Those things can't touch me here, where I watch my 19 summers fall like falling flakes into the maw of an ancient creature who lies beneath white feathers and webbed feet, paddling over my eternal home's molten heart. So I've spent a lot of time in Long Island. I grew up on the coast of Massachusetts, and I've always been really close to the ocean, and I've really grown to love the water. So when I came to Trinity and walked on the women's rowing team, I found myself falling in love with the water all over again in a different way. This next poem is called Horizon Bound. You are 60 feet long and 220 pounds, but I like to keep you on one shoulder. I like to keep you above the ground, as high as my body can manage, because you are my keeper. I'm with you when the sun rises, when the river steams with mist. We sit in the cold tendrils, the wisps shot through by the half-open eyelid of morning. I'm with you after sunset, when orange rims the trees like embers, when the water swirls like ink, like oil, almost as black as you. And when I put you down to rest in our house, your weight never truly leaves my shoulder. When I sleep, I think of you. I dream of what we do. I dream of you holding me and my sisters as we push you toward the sky, 8 oars pulling higher, higher into flight as the waves suck and slip at your hull. Try not to let you go. I dream of us dancing together, together on the water, always horizon bound. So rowing isn't just about being on the water. It's also about being on a machine. So there's basically 2 types of training that we do. It's land-based training and water-based training. And one is definitely more fun than the other for me. So this next poem talks to these differences, and it's called The Rower's Dichotomy. It's a longer poem. The mechanical dragon crouches on the ground, waiting for me to climb on her back, taunting me to dare. She's an ergometer of the dynamic species, and her name is Concept 2. I settle into my saddle, grasp the metallic reins, and at the kick of my spurs, her wheel turns with a hiss and roar. I stare into her square face, into the mouth that spits out numbers, into the eyes that see nothing but glory in pain. She's the only dragon I know that never flies. The onyx vessel sits in slings, waiting for us to pick her up, smiling at us in the sun. She's a boat, a carbon fiber shell, and her name is the Unbowed. We lift her up, carry her on our shoulders, and at the call of our coxswain, we place her in the water. We admire her cylindrical curves, the way water wicks from her sides, and those sliding seats oiled with WD-40. She's the only boat we know that can fly. I sit astride you in my organic armor, my body as my only weapon. The distance is set, a sacrifice made. As a woman, I am already bleeding before the war. We sit inside you in our matching uniforms, our bodies in numbered order. The distance is buoyed. Our backs face the finish line. As women, some of us are bleeding before the battle. You breathe fire into me. I can feel it blazing through my muscles, scorching my every tendon, smoldering slowly up my spine. You're hurting me. I'm hurting me. Hot, hot. You send a thrill through our veins. We can feel it jumping in our muscles, bouncing through every bone, beaming like a light from our spirits. You're moving us. We're moving us. Bright, bright. The distance ends. I look up now at your animated face covered in numbers, and I see black. We look up now at the bright blue sky, our breathing synchronized. We are one body. We are one mind. We are us. Okay, so last poem. I'm going to end this reading from where it all began for me. My grandma died when I was 13, and this event really sparked my writing in a way that not a lot of other subjects have. So this poem is called The Voice of Ashes, and it's dedicated to her. I'm having trouble reassembling myself. I mean this quite literally. Ever since they spread my ashes here, it's gotten harder and harder to be the whole I once was. But I can sense my distant particles floating randomly, tangled in the weeds at high tide, sprinkled into the brown silt that covers the bottom of this bay. I think part of my left pinky toe may be lying in the stomach of a swan. It's the strangest feeling. After trying to recollect myself for roughly 5 years, good God, this water is murky as ever. I obviously haven't had much luck. And yet somehow I enjoy watching them eat lunch on the porch, burping and laughing. I smile to see my foolish, charming husband, so lively. He sits every morning in the same chair, sometimes glancing at me across the road, sometimes gazing straight at my heart. I can never tell for how long. As summer wind sprays dappled light, I see the two girls walk down the deck, hand in hand. My, how they've grown. They're so beautiful. The youngest makes sure to look both ways before crossing the road. And then I realize, is that her, the oldest? She looks like, how old is she now, 18? I choke on a wet breath. They sit on the grassy bank that overlooks my sanctuary, still holding hands. I listen to their moving lips, yet I am deaf to the words they speak, as they are deaf to mine. My ears are no longer trained to the music of the world. Stroking the younger girl's metallic hair, the oldest brings their joined hands to her chest. Her hazel eyes lift and land right on me. I'm frozen. I can't move, can't think. I stare at my two granddaughters, who are remembering me. Seasons may pass from this moment on, scattering me thinner and thinner, but of all my mangled memories, this is my favorite. I am determined to hold on to it, to memorize the backs of their shining heads as they depart for the house that has become my eternal mirror, its painted wood gleaming like white marble. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Anything else? I mean,
You can disperse the crowds,
okay. Well, thank you again for being here.